Over the weekend, as there was this putative revolt within Russian military ranks led by the commander of the Wagner mercenary group, uh, all the suggestion that, that Mr. Prigozhin, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was going to march on Moscow and Putin was fleeing and things were imperiled in Putin world. Well, that didn't exactly happen. We'll get more on that from Dakota Wood in just a minute. But in addition to that, against the backdrop of that development between Russia and Ukraine and that war, former President Trump was in Georgia at the Faith and Freedom Coalition event there, and he had this to say about both the border, which is sort of muted in terms of coverage, and more specifically about the war between Russia and Ukraine, restating his commitment to be a peacemaker.
So we're going to keep foreign Christian-hating communists, Marxists, and socialists out of America. We're keeping them out of America. When I was president, the world was stable and calm because America was respected and strong. Now, as we see in Russia and all of these other places, this whole world is on fire. This world is on fire. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine totally settled. I'll have it done in 24 hours. I say that, and I would do that. That's easy compared to some of the things. I'd get that done in 24 hours. I know them both. I know them both. As the Bible says, blessed are the peacemakers. See that? I will be your peacemaker. I was your peacemaker.
Trump paraphrasing the Beatitudes. That's always fun. He's going to be the peacemaker, restating his 24-hour commitment. For more on this and what happened over the weekend and what it means in terms of the state of affairs between Russia and Ukraine, as Ukraine's counteroffensive is reportedly not living up to the West's expectations. Pleased to be joined by Dakota Wood. He served America for 2 decades in the Marine Corps. He is the Senior Research Fellow for Defense Programs at the Heritage Foundation. Dakota, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thanks. Thanks for having me on.
So this Wagner Group revolt led by Prigozhin over the weekend. You know, there's a lot of chatter online. I'm sure you've seen that maybe this was a psyop play by Russia, by Putin and Prigozhin. And even if it wasn't, the idea, Wall Street Journal opining over the weekend that this internal rebellion, Putin survives it, but it leaves him weakened. I mean, what's your handle on the reality of this rebellion and its implications?
Well, I think the commentary is a natural desire for people to talk about things that they really don't know. And not that I'm an expert in internal Russian politics, but I'm just saying all of these reports have lots of caveats. It could be, it may, it appears that, etc. This is what we do know. The Russian military hasn't performed well at all in the last 15, 16 months of this war. So it's been subject to a huge amount of criticism about how it could have lost the advantage given all the equipment materials it had. Putin has often used the Wagner Group and a couple of other private military companies or mercenaries to do his bidding in Africa and Syria and elsewhere where Russian formal military forces wouldn't be politically appropriate. So this Yevgeny I forgot his
Prigozhin.
last name.
Yeah.
Prigozhin, thank you. His guys, Wagner, have been very aggressive, very brutal, but they have made progress where conventional military forces have not. You know, it heightens ego, it heightens laudatory comments, press reporting and all, and so you're going to have tensions between the military and the Wagner Group, especially with old Yevgeny being so active on social media. So he has taken to really criticizing the heads of the Russian military, the Minister of Defense, and the senior general in charge of all operations in Ukraine. And what happened was last week, it appeared that regular Russian forces actually started shooting at Wagner Group forces. Well, that's just going to tick everybody off all the more. So Prigozhin finally had his fill, turns his forces and starts heading to Moscow, calling for essentially the firing of the two top military guys. Well, Putin can't tolerate that. People were concerned that you'd have divided loyalties in the Russian military, then who controls, the nuclear weapons portfolio? Does Russia descend into civil war? Is Putin bounced out of power? Well, clearly none of that happened. So the deal struck was, hey, Yevgeny, you go to Belarus and cool your heels for a while. The Wagner Group guys are going to have to sign contracts with the Russian military, become part of Russian military forces. We'll see how that, plays out. But from all reports so far from inside Russia and Ukraine, Putin is still in control. He wasn't abandoned by his advisors. The Russian military apparently did not take sides with the Wagner Group. And so I think it was just an outburst of frustration and anger. It could have been a false flag. We'll have these guys go in, but even the Wagner Group shot down like 13 aircraft, Russian helicopters that were responding to track their movement. So I don't think the false flag piece has a lot of credibility. I think it was just flaring tempers and egos. The thing has been quieted, and then this will probably lead Putin to be much more aggressive in Ukraine, demanding better results from his military.
Yeah, I mean, Prigozhin, now he's exiled to Belarus, and I guess Lukashenko, who's a Putin stooge, interceded to try to negotiate this development, so he's not going to be charged criminally. He gets to exile in Belarus, but yeah. So that last piece, I've read some other assessments that conclude the same thing. This will lead Putin to come over the top and be more aggressive to launch his own offensive, and that against the backdrop. And this is CNN reporting with their usual anonymous sources. And I know I'm skeptical of CNN with everything else, so I'm skeptical of them with this too. But they are cheerleaders and they are propagandists, so it's interesting that they would write a story: early stages of Ukrainian counteroffensive not meeting expectations, according to Western officials that talked to CNN. So where do we stand in your assessment with the combination, if this is accurate, not meeting expectations, the counteroffensive, and now we have Putin incentivized because of this contretemps with the Wagner Group to come over the top hard in Ukraine?
Yeah, hardened lines similar to World War I on what the status is. That was a result of the hesitancy, risk aversion, timidity, and kind of the dribbling out of support to Ukraine for the past year. So, it's always been reactive, delayed in weeks or months for support from the West, the U.S., U.K., Germany, etc., to Ukraine. So as the Russian forces have made their way in, and Ukraine has gradually been supported, the Russians got to the point where they could harden their positions, right? And going against a prepared defense is always that much harder. So when everybody is demanding or clamoring for this counteroffensive, Ukraine finally has enough ability to do that, but it's against a force that has had months to prepare defensive positions. And so you're just not going to see these dramatic breakthroughs. They're going to have probing, local advances perhaps, but the Russians have been making local advances as well. So I think for the foreseeable future, unless something magical happens, Gandalf shows up on his horse with a big staff,
Yeah.
I think it's just going to be a bloody, brutal trading back and forth, and casualties will continue to go up. Putin can't tolerate, all these criticisms for more delayed action. So to the point you made, he's going to double down on offense. The Russian way of war is massive fires. So you're going to see, dramatically increase, I think, artillery, rocket. Right now, Russia still controls the air, so, using aircraft. Russia has not used any of its bomber fleet, so maybe you can see, those brought in as well. There have been reports that China has given enough powder to Russia for the production of, some kind of insane 7 million rounds of artillery ammunition or something like that. So, the Russians are firing tens of thousands of rounds a day, and you'll probably see that go up. So I think it's just going to be brutal. 250,000 casualties, dead, wounded on the Russian side, probably 100,000 on the Ukrainian side. the Ukrainians will run out of people before Russia does, and so it's going to be an ugly hot summer.
Dakota, we've seen tens of billions of dollars
Mm-hmm.
of worth of American munitions sent to Ukraine. What is happening right now in the U.S. defense industry? Are these factories humming to replace what we've already sent over there? And how has this affected our readiness? Because we've sent so much, not only to Ukraine, but remember, we also abandoned nearly $100 million worth of $100 billion worth of armament in Afghanistan.
Yeah, again, I think it's a consequence of this dribbling things out. You never have a high enough level, an assured level of funding over time for industry to then make a capital investment, where they're hiring workers, very expensive, expanding the production floor, very expensive. Why would an aircraft or a munitions manufacturer do that if they don't think there's going to be a return, in profit margin, be able to sustain that? You'd have companies.
So we aren't doing it? We aren't making replacements?
We have been stimulating, the government, has been stimulating that for the past 6 months or so, but it takes a long time to train workers and to expand the size of the factories. So right now, we can produce something like 14,000 artillery rounds a month. The Ukrainians are firing 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 rounds a day. So current U.S. production meets 2 or 3 days worth of artillery use. There is a commitment to quintuple, 5 times that amount, get to something like 90,000 rounds a month, but that won't be achieved for probably a year or more. It just takes time to pour cement and get the tools and train the workers and all that. And this is the consequence. They call it a 30-year story. At the end of the Cold War, everything dropped down. The operations in Afghanistan and Iraq was consuming supplies that had been built up for the Cold War in case we went to war against the Soviet Union in Europe. So we've been kind of eating our seed corn, right, with no real investment in expanding production of military vehicles and ships and armaments and those sorts of things because there was no market. Everything was shrinking. All the missiles that we use are handmade. There's not an assembly line, where you crank these things out 100 a day. You have trained workers with little microscopes and whatnot, magnifying glasses, hand assembling these things at Raytheon and other companies. So the American public just isn't aware of how low we have gotten in production capacity over the last 3 decades. Now you have a big war, you need lots of stuff, and an inability to manufacture it. So the risk then is if you enable or allow Ukraine to fail and Russia wins, what are the strategic long-term consequences of that for U.S. interests in Europe? So we want to give that stuff to Ukraine because they're the ones doing the fighting, but at risk of decrementing our own inventories, which has caused some real concern in the Pentagon.
We better hope Gandalf shows up. Dakota Wood, he served America for 2 decades in the Marine Corps. He's now the Senior Research Fellow for Defense Programs at the Heritage Foundation. Dakota, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
And he joins us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. On AM 560, The Answer.